salespeople suck at interviewing. As far as my experience interviewing salespeople, they ask all the wrong questions to make sure that they are selling themselves into a job that's going to be a good fit for them long term. They ask all the wrong questions. They fail to ask the most important questions that will lend to a much better work experience.
Welcome to the Two Sales Guys podcast with your hosts, Sean Whitley and Matthew Sopiers. What's commonly talked about are the tactics and methodologies for sales professionals. What is less commonly talked about is the stress and anxiety that comes with being a seller. Each day, sales reps are asked to take rejection after rejection, operate in a world of uncertainty and high pressure, and either fail to hit their number or get a higher quota the next year. We'll talk about how to cope with these pressures and what a winning sales mindset really looks like. Sales is often called a performance business, and we'll explore how stress can drive bad selling behaviors, and alternatively, we'll look to experts on how you can manage your mind and wellness first so that you're putting your best foot forward every day at work. We'll talk to professionals in the industry who share the same experiences and what organizations can do to create a healthy, winning sales culture.
Welcome back. Today on the Two Sales Guys, we interview a longtime mentor and personal friend of both Matt and mine, Mr. Forrest Hobbs. He's a self-proclaimed meathead turned bearded hipster with a bit of a sordid past. But in all seriousness, Forrest has an over 20-year successful sales career, holding multiple chief revenue officer positions, an active member of the board of advisors for several companies, and a proven track record of leading high-growth sales organizations through multiple large acquisitions. Forrest, thanks for joining us. Matt, do you want to kick things off?
Forrest, for all the years that I've known you, I know your background and what you were doing before sales, but I don't think I ever asked you as directly like how you actually got into sales. Like what made you decide to build a career in this crazy world that we subject ourselves to every day?
I suck at coding. I think there's thing one. And if I map that to the career path I wound up in, which is in technology, you're kind of either on the coding side of the business or you're on the business side of the business, right? You're either on the front end of the business or you're the actual smart, awesome people that give us the foundation by which we go bring solutions to market. But I think in terms of the path that got me there, I can literally remember, I think I was 12 years old. And I had this amazing idea, right, that was going to change the world and was going to be kind of my mic drop on retiring at age 13 because it was so incredible. And I back then there's no internet, right? I went out and I found where you got information to submit a patent. I filled out all the patent applications and thought, this is it, I'm done. And then it was literally like 2 weeks later, I got a response from the patent office saying like, sorry, your patent's rejected. This thing already exists. And it hit me kind of like, well, if this thing exists, like, where is it? Why can't I go buy one? And then that's where in my head, I was like, hey, I don't have to be the idea guy necessarily. I really wanted to be an entrepreneur. I really did not want to be the big company guy. And it dawned on me that I don't have to be the idea guy to be the person who actually brings the idea to market. And so I specifically studied, I chose my college specifically for their entrepreneurship program, CU Boulder, which had a great program that married the engineering school to the business school and the software community, which was really this burgeoning community in Boulder at the time. And that got me more of the bug towards a career in software, right? But as you well know, my path meandered. I was a commercial fisherman in Alaska for a while, and then wound up in Hollywood, and what a blast that was. But my Hollywood stint is where I actually got into tech more specifically as a career path. And I came out of a company called Artisan Entertainment. We were the company that bought and distributed that movie, The Blair Witch Project, if you remember that. So we made all kinds of fun movies, sold that company to Lionsgate Entertainment. And that was where I realized that in our business and entertainment, there was a piece that was really fundamentally broken, right? That was inefficient and needed to be improved. And that technology was the perfect way to solve the problem. And so left the company, right before the acquisition and founded my own tech company. And that was my first realization that no matter what your role is, right, I'm the founding CEO at 26 or something, who cares? How important sales was, no matter where you are in the company in the beginning. And I wanted to be a startup guy, and realized how much of my time I spent selling, right? Selling my idea to investors, selling, the distribution and licensing agreements to our content providers. Like, it was all came back to selling, and I'm a people person and I'm a problem solver by nature. And so it was a very natural path for me to go from wanting to be in the startup world to knowing what place within the startup world I would do my best work and offer my most value. And so that was it. I was addicted after that to startups and to, I think the art and science of selling. That learning experience about sales is not about charm and charisma and all that BS that it's portrayed as, and that there is a investment that you make in yourself as a sales professional that can remove all of that hope as a strategy component of it. And in the spirit of today's conversation about stress, that ultimately that those mechanisms, those muscles that you build in your investment as a sales professional can remove to a large degree, the component of stress that can detract from your ability to be a great sales professional. Because I think it's really important to remember that stress is a critical mechanism of our survival. Stress is the fight or flight mechanism that kicks on your adrenaline when the lion is chasing your sorry zebra ass through the Serengeti. And, but to remember that stress is not designed to be a sustained mechanism, that it's designed for that 30 seconds to 3-minute burst of speed to save your life. And that in our world, in society, we've created the notion of sustained stress, and that the impact stress has on you when you're not using it for what it was designed for, which is to save your hide, is very detrimental to your health and well-being. That when you're in stress, fight or flight mode, which now could be sitting in traffic, or in the case of this conversation, stressing out about hitting your sales number, right? When you have a sustained element of stress, your other biological systems turn off, your immune system and your reproductive system, right? And you lose sleep, you get sick, you lose your cool and your capacity to be present in the moment, where cool, calm, and collected will work to your advantage. And so I think it's a really great topic that you guys are introducing, particularly in an area of business that is sort of renowned for having incredible pressure and stress.
Yeah. And I think, I'm really interested in how you think about balancing exerting pressure down to your team to drive good behaviors versus relieving them of stress, and the type of culture that you create. Because, Sean and I were very fortunate to work with you for a very long time, and there were plenty of stressful moments, but there were plenty of fun ones as well. And I think we felt supported, and we kind of went through it all together. And so, how do you think, though, about creating a culture that balances, holding people accountable with, also making sure that you're not causing bad behaviors by exerting too much stress or pressure down to the team?
Well, I think as a hiring manager, that starts with the hiring process, right? I think you need to be acutely aware of what attributes natural DNA, right? Not teachable things that you look for during the hiring process. And the word competitiveness comes up. So are you naturally a person that is an overachiever, that has an incredible degree of accountability, where the finger of blame is never outwardly pointed, it's always inwardly pointed? Accountability is a massively important characteristic for you to look for as a hiring manager. And more importantly, if you're looking for a job as a salesperson, I think that self-reflection to understand is that your natural state to take on that mission, right? And to win at all costs. Is that fun for you? Do you thrive and derive energy from the mission and the pressure, or do you burn out? Right. And I think a hiring manager's job is to ensure that you are finding people and team culture and chemistry that not just maps to the inevitable stress and pressure you feel as being the organization that owns something that's not black and white. It is black and white. There's no gray. You have a number and you win or you lose, right? Your job as a hiring manager is to make sure that you're bringing on people who are going to rise to that occasion, and that also maps to your style as a leader. There are some leaders who are all stick and no carrot, and there's some leaders who are all carrot and no stick, and there's some leaders who actually take the time to create diversity and balance in their organization and actually try to understand the motivations of the individuals that they're bringing on board, so that stress and pressure has an outcome that benefits that individual more broadly than just their paycheck. And so to me, the organizational leader and the hiring manager has an incredible responsibility for bringing in people who are a good fit for the culture that you intend to create, but also an incredible interest and responsibility of understanding what those individuals want out of that leg of the race of their career, and that you're giving them those opportunities to get the experiences, get the learnings, get whatever it is they want, the paycheck, who knows what it is, right? In exchange for leaving it all on the field for you, right? That to me is a really critical piece.
And does any stories come into mind where you noticed someone on your team and you're like, you know what, that person's, they're at the end of they're burning, they're running out of wax in the candle, or what other analogy we want to call it. But like any time where you've noticed someone, and like in that scenario, like what did you do to help them? You know, maybe they were too stressed out or they'd been working too hard. Any stories that might come to mind?
Yeah. I mean, I don't have any that I'm not going to tell some eloquent story that's going to resonate, but I think, you're paying attention to the symptoms of stress are incredibly important, right? I think, hopelessness, right? Pessimism, irritability, like there's all those things that you can identify when a person is sort of gone from being in a positive pressure situation where they're forced to sort of like turn it on to when they're becoming negative. And I think that the rotten apple in the barrel is what you're trying to avoid, where people's hopelessness and negativity starts to spread throughout the team and creating a culture of pessimism. And I like to say to my teams, like, we always talk about our culture and like, do we have a sales culture and what's our company culture? And I always like to say to them, that's your decision. Like, you're our culture, right? That's your choice. When you encounter the inevitable challenges in the job, are you taking them on, and are you being accountable about it, or are you playing party to the negativity that comes from it? And so, there you can count more often than not. I think the bigger responsibility you have as an organizational leader or as an individual to hold your teammates accountable for their contribution to negativity is to understand, is it terminal or can we salvage the situation? I think that's the most important piece to identify, is to have the awareness that it's happening, but also the courage to sit someone down and ask them, hey, are we done? Like, are we at the end of the road with you here? Do we need to think about what's next to get you to a place where you can be your best self and do your best work, and to accept that responsibility as a hiring manager that it's probably your fault, whether you didn't make a hire correctly, or you didn't set up an environment where those individuals could both, avoid the persistent negative stress that can burn them out, or that you can address it in a way that's planful, that can allow for them to communicate about it and manage it and handle it in a more constructive way. And you can tell, right? You can see it. And we could talk maybe at a later date about that laundry list of things that you look for as people start to lose faith in the mission and start to turn towards negativity, right?
And one of the things So first of all, we've known each other a while, and I've always known you to take extreme care of your body in terms of working out, being healthy, eating right. I mean, I remember this one time we were in Heathrow, and it was time to get a snack before this long flight we had coming up. And as we're looking through the shop to get a snack, I'm over here just grabbing like whatever my body says, like, oh, I'd love to eat that right now. Tastes good. I'm happy. It's a long flight. Cool. I can afford to have this Oreo or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I see you over there reading the labels, right?
Yeah.
Like I would love to have this, but too much sugar. I'd love to have that. But where I'm getting at with this is I've always seen you take great care of that. I know you've obviously from the team, you've worked really closely with us on getting us better, working on our skill sets, self-improvement, from all the different things we've worked on. But what we're seeing a common thread with all the interviews we've had is the people that are the 1%ers in their industry are the ones that are taking care of their mind and working it out just as effectively as their bodies. When you talk about athletes, for example, I mean, was there a certain point in time that you ever had that switch where you realized I have to take care of my mind just as much as I take care of my body, if not more?
Yeah. It's fascinating, right, Sean? It's a great question. And you know, in all my infinite wisdom, it only took me 40 years to figure out that all the time in the gym and all the supplements and all that crap I was plugging into my body to try, and all the coffee you pour into yourself in the morning to try and balance yourself out, right? Like, we know our bad habits, and I'm really excited that we are now in a place where that kind of focus on functional medicine, right? On understanding, like, as you mentioned, the critical link between mind and body is being backed by science, right? Because, you know, I used to have that joke at Telesign where we all work together. I was like, hey, if you want to know where the sales department is, just go look for the desks that are filled with workout supplements and bottles of hard alcohol, right? And what's that? It's just like, it's stress relief. And so I think the critical moment for me was, you know, finding a life partner, and my wife, who you both know, Tiffany, who has dedicated her entire life to understanding that. And I think we're in this new world of you know, life hacking and biohacking where, you know, we are understanding that a lot more deeply. I mean, you talked about nutrition. You know, I'm on this keto diet right now, and people are like, oh, are you losing weight? And I'm like, I don't care about losing weight. That's not why I'm on the ketogenic diet. I'm on the ketogenic diet because I'm fascinated by, you know, the way that I can retrain my mind and body to produce energy. And the biggest benefit that I've gotten out of the ketogenic diet is the stability that I have, the focus and the clarity and the consistency of energy that I have from the moment I wake up without using an alarm to into the evening without those peaks and valleys of energy. And that, you know, journey that I'm on right now to understand, you know, how things like mindfulness and breath and meditation can affect you in positive ways, long-term and short-term, right? Not just in the moment, but long-term health and nutrition and what that means. It gives me the energy and the focus and the consistency that I need to be present to do my job, but also at the end of the day, not be exhausted and have time for, you know, for my wife and my family. And, you know, that's a journey that won't stop as we continue to learn. And I think it's a difficult place for salespeople oftentimes because there's a culture of sort of toughness and machismo, you know, in sales that maybe makes it less approachable to some people. But yeah, definitely meeting Tiff and her lifelong commitment and focus on understanding it from a perspective of science, that this isn't just a bunch of, you know, metaphysical hippie voodoo, that it's actually, you know, we're training muscles, you know. So if you're a gym rat and meditation is not approachable to you, the concept of mindfulness and focus on the breath is about moving your focus from things that haven't happened yet or things that already did that you can no longer help back to the breath. And what you're doing is not metaphysical hippiness. It's you're literally training your brain the way you do a bicep curl in the gym. You're telling your brain, I've lost focus, bring my brain back. Now let's apply that to a sales situation. I don't know a seller out there who hasn't put, or a sales leader in a board meeting, in a customer meeting, where that, that stump the chump, stump the professor jerk throws you a question just to be mean spirited, and it takes you off your game, and you get on your heels and you get defensive and your blood pressure goes up. And I found, since getting into meditation, that my capacity to bring myself back from that place of nerves and anxiety and stress, to slow myself down and think through the situation that was just presented to me, and to respond in much more effective ways, improved since, taking on meditation into my life. As far as the nutritional element, the side of it, the balance, right? The respecting and investing in understanding how sleep affects me, how my diet affects me, how my relationships affect me. I haven't missed a day of work for being sick in like 5 or 6 years, and I think that's, if you look at stress, one of the leading causes, like the saying, stress kills. Well, it does. that's science. That's not, some hypothesis. It's science. And so it's very meaningful to me, and it's my journey, and everyone has sort of their own needs. I think that's one thing, that there's no magic bullet, right? You got to really figure out your own needs. But if you do invest in it and do seek to understand it, I think the benefits of it, Sean, are pretty remarkable, at least for me. Right?
And do you practice mindfulness throughout the day? I mean, or do you do it in the morning or the afternoon? Like, how do you infuse some of that stuff you just talked about into your daily routine?
Sure.
And then how do you call on it in extreme situations?
Yeah. It's I'm not some Jedi, right? I think it's there's not some I'm not some 7th degree black belt of this thing. It doesn't work that way. I think it's about how much more aware I have become, my capacity to identify when I'm in those situations, whether I applied mindfulness or breathing or meditation to the moment. It's more about recognizing the moment. The better you get at recognizing the moment before or as it's happening, the better you'll be able to apply those things you learn to making the most of that moment. And I think, I recognize that, Matt, you like to be underwater. And I think I recognized I did it before I learned how to do it in scuba diving, that you're in there and you've got your BC and your tank, and that focus on the breath and that sort of calm and peace and focus was something I already did before I started learning meditation. And then I started learning after meditation that I started applying it in meetings where things were getting stressful. And I recognized that my breathing and my heart rate was going up, and I stopped, and I focused on that, and I focused on my breath and brought myself back down and had more poise and more thoughtfulness. And so, going from doing it as a practice where you're doing a morning meditation to set yourself up for your day, or you're doing a sort of restorative practice in the evening to let go of your day, right? And or a yoga nidra to get yourself into sleep mode so you can recover, right, from one stressful day to the next. Those are the things that we do kind of proactively. And I think as you move to a place where you can apply it reactively, as you just mentioned, I'm okay at it, but it's part of my journey is to get better and better at it.
What I like to see in this response you just said is I see evolution in you, Forrest, since we worked together, just between then and now. And I think one of the things Matt and I were very aware of going into this podcast series is that historical culture that sales managers typically have and leadership typically has of, tough skin, just, shut up and don't talk about all the butterflies and all that stuff. Right. And I think, I don't know, what I'd like to see is what can we tell to leadership today that to change their position on it? And I feel like you've gone through that. And I guess maybe it's more of self-experience that you've witnessed it and its effects, or, you've obviously had a lot of time with a renowned wellness and yoga expert that's helping you understand it scientifically. But I guess that was one thing I want to, how do we help make this thing more accepted and mainstream so that it can provide the proper benefits to sellers and management in terms of being better at their jobs and coping with the stress so that they can perform better?
Yeah. I think it's a bigger subject, Sean. I think in terms of what sales managers and organizational leaders can do to create an environment where people can do their best work there's a lot of components to it, and it's your responsibility to manage up and manage down, right? I think we allow cultures of stress to persist in sales because we as organizational leaders are not doing an effective enough job of setting our sales organizations up for success, right? And we have a massive responsibility there to be a voice and a seat at the table with the leadership team to make sure that the company understands how critical things like alignment are to making sales feel supported in our journey to go deliver results to the company. There's all kinds of things that we get a chance to do as organizational leaders that can help those unnecessary, stressful cultures and environments from occurring in the first place and allow our organizations to rise to the occasion and buy in. I think one of the things that I see organizational leaders and companies sometimes struggle to do is to be transparent when transparency is not going to produce negativity, right? There's certain situations where you can't just say to everyone who walks up to the water cooler and sees you that like, hey, we're running out of money, like, hey, next week, like if we don't get this round of funding locked up, like you're done. Or, hey, we're getting acquired, right? Or there's all those situations where, or, hey, there's a layoff happening soon. I hope you're not on the list. There's certain things you don't communicate. But what I think I see companies do relative to sales is think that because we're these emotional creatures in their eyes, right, that need to get pumped up on drinking our own Kool-Aid, that if we read them into the truth of where things are, that they'll just die on the vine, that we emotional sales creatures will just shrink away and that morale will die and the people will defect. And then maybe they will. But what I found is that transparency of reading my teams into the challenge, right? The mission is a great way to see who's on your team. And what I found more often than not is if you've done your job in the hiring process and you are willing to give that transparency of the difficulties, right? That the company is, hey, we're struggling on our product in this area. We're deficient on investment in marketing in this area. We're right. There's all those things that you don't need to hide from your teams to say, look, guys, this is on us. We have a chance here to be accountable for the mission and to do our job. And the challenge that we have has some headwinds, and these are the headwinds. More often than not, you will see your teams rise to that occasion, no matter how mature or immature they are in their career. If you've done your job in the hiring process, you're going to get that response. And I think that reading people into those things takes those unknowns out of the equation. It causes stress, Sean, because we all get in our heads when we're not part of that, inner circle, smoky room of decision making, where they're kind of like, what's going on? And when you get that, and what happens is people start to make up their own truth in their head, and then they start to corroborate that. They share it with other people to get buy-in, and then you have this whole sort of layer of anxiety, right, that can really work against your productivity as an organization, as opposed to just giving your teams the respect they deserve as professionals, to read them into the transparency they deserve and let them rise to the occasion of the mission, right? And then giving them a safe environment. Like the other piece of this, Sean, it's maybe not about metaphysical is trust. Right. And that's a big component of building trust is to my style might be different than others, but I give trust first. I extend it. And if you burn me, then I learn. Right. So the burn and learn, extend the trust to individuals to read them into what's going on, but also to give a shit. Right. To ask their opinions and give them a voice. and show them in those environments that openness and that candor is not going to be, there's not going to be a punitive response. And I think a lot of people talk a big talk about candor, about, hey, just be direct and candorous. But really creating an environment where that candor is supported and celebrated can also help people feel like they're contributing to the decision making. And that is a massive component of removing stress, is having people feel like they're part of it, right? They're part of that process. So those are two important pieces that I think I try to apply that have worked well for me, and there's certainly plenty more.
And on that note, I mean, I think support is like a big part of it. Feeling supported helps alleviate a lot of the stress and challenges and issues that we go through. That's become a little bit harder with COVID and not getting any physical time with people.
Yeah.
What adjustments have you made to how you run your sales organizations since COVID?
It's doing the things that you and I are doing right now, right? It's like, turn your video camera on, right? In your one-on-ones. And, the interesting thing, Matt, is that it's less about what I think I have done to help create a better sense of community and connectedness with my sales org than it is the way I've seen the rest of the company adjust to it. Because running a global distributed sales organization usually means you're not sitting in the same room with your team every day. You've got people all over the country, all over the world. And so, you and I worked on that. I remember there was like a Harvard Business Review article about how to create better virtual connectedness when we built our Belgrade office out. So we've been in that business of being virtual and being connected as a team virtually our entire careers. And so to me, the big aha moments came when, the people who spend their career sitting in the office with their peers, it could be an inside sales team at HQ, it could be the engineers, it could be G&A in the business, whoever it is. I think the bigger transformation that's happened as a result of COVID and virtual working has come from the CEO and the HQ operations teams and engineering who are now in these virtual environments and realizing that you don't have to be in an office to stay connected. You don't have to be in an office to create a culture and an energy, and that there are incredible benefits to letting people work from home that come in the form of balance in their life. So as it relates to what I've experienced, forget what I've applied, but what I've experienced is, guys, that I have lived out of a suitcase darn near every single week for a couple of decades of my career. And, I flew home on, I think it was like Thursday, March 12th this year after a board meeting. And I left my suitcase in my bedroom staring at me the way I always do. And then a couple of weeks in, I put it away in the garage, and that was it. And because of that, I have this quality time with my wife. I get to do things with my son, not just on the weekends. The anxiousness I have about going from Friday back to the airport on Monday, all that stuff has changed for me in a way that I think's been incredibly positive. But at the same time, I have to respect that there's been a very stressful negative change for people who are not in the same situation I am, where this stay-at-home order, work from home thing has been fantastic for me. But for some people, it's created that disassociation and that isolation. And I think understanding that and over communicating and reaching out more to people to make them feel connected and part of the team is a responsibility of leadership as well.
If you're interested in educational videos to better yourself, we highly recommend the Great Courses Plus. The Great Courses Plus is a subscription video on-demand learning service that gets you unlimited, uninterrupted access to a world of learning anytime and anywhere you want it. With courses on thousands of topics, you're sure to find something that will ignite your curiosity and invigorate your passion for learning. So head on over to the2salesguys.com/GCP.
I think that transitions nicely to targets and quotas, because this year, just as much as any, has been challenging to figure out how to measure success for startups in general. It's a bit of a crapshoot sometimes when you have to figure out what quota should be set at and how to target the sales organization. You've more recently started to advise companies. And so maybe you have some advice or thoughts on how companies can think about and set targets and then adjust them accordingly.
Yeah.
Any best practices or thoughts you have in that area, I think is going to be useful.
Yeah, it's I love it. To me, I do a lot of advisory work for companies, particularly early stage, right, where there's not a baseline, right? You don't have great data to support your decisions around quotas because there's no magic quota number, right? But it's a lot easier than some people, I think, make it, right? At the end of the day, what you're trying to do is create alignment, right, between the investment that you're able to, right, or willing to make in sales resourcing and the target for the company, right? And those two things have to be connected. And I think the role of the CRO is to understand that connection and to factor in the available data. And if not, to be able to extrapolate based on experience and available data in the market, like how to set a number that is appropriate, meaning it's not too easy and it's not unattainable, because you don't just set a number and then take the number of your reps you have and then divide that into the number you have and boom, there's your quota per rep. You know, when you set your company up for failure, that's darn near the worst thing you can do. It's about being realistic, Matt. It's about using math and logic and removing emotion from the conversation to say that here's the productivity that we should be able to expect from the team. And here's the best way to set that team up, right, to achieve the target that we have. And if the target is the thing that you guys are making the fixed piece, the company target, then the variable component has to be how you get there. If the fixed piece is the amount of investment you're willing to make in the sales organization, then the target has to be variable at the top line. And so that negotiation that the sales leader makes between the company, right, and their own organization is incredibly important to both set your team up for success and set the company up for success. And so that part of my job is really fun because it's mathematical. And instead of coming in and having like a hard ass negotiation with my CFO and CEO, it's more, I don't come in and say, if you don't do this, then I'm not going to do that. It's more, hey guys, here's the options, right? Here's our options, right? We can invest this and achieve that, or we can invest this and achieve that, right? And it's about presenting the options based on the data that you have to support the productivity that you can achieve based on the investment that's willing to be made.
What do you say to a rep right now that comes to you and says, am I getting a lower quota because of COVID?
I would say, why? I mean, there's a lot of businesses that have benefited from COVID, right? And to me, that there's always like, and I think, Matt, that you actually kind of came around from a different angle on why quota setting is important. And that is, it's being able to communicate to your reps how you arrived at it, right? And I have this conversation where they're like, hey, like, how should I get commissioned or whatever in my role? And I'm like, it's easy. What's your variable compensation? Divide that into your target. There's your commission rate, right? Well, what's my target? Well, I don't know. Let's dig into the data and see what kind of productivity you have. Like, what's your funnel and your conversion rates and your velocities, and then let's just do some real basic math. But the COVID question is more about like, well, what impact is COVID having on your business? Because in some businesses, it's fueling the business, not slowing it down. But in some cases, COVID, it ground businesses to a halt. And that's where you got to make those crappy decisions, where in these situations, you sometimes have to say goodbye to people who are fantastic, right? Who are great.
Well, the whole comp is set up in a way that, you're paid out when, you deliver something, and there is a hard truth of sales in that, like, if there's nothing there, there's no sales, then there's no comp to be paid out. I mean, that's just the the nature of the beast. I think sometimes reps are lost on that. They in that, like, listen, part of your comp is tied to us and a revenue that you produce. And if there is no revenue, COVID or not, there's no way to pay you out the incentive part of the comp plan. It's super difficult because there's both sides of the story. There's the company and there's the individual involved, and there's retaining the talent, which is another important part of figuring out how to make adjustments on the fly. But there really is no easy answer to some of this stuff.
I think, Matt, we've done ourselves a disservice as a sales leadership or a community of business, where it seems like in the world of sales, there has been a change in expectations, right? That as opposed to looking at your employment there and your base salary as a set of commitments and responsibilities that you have to the company, and the commission is the reward for doing your job, regardless of the challenges and the headwinds. I've seen an increase in expectations, particularly from new generations of sellers, where it's like, hey, I want to get a non-recoverable draw for 3 to 6 months. Okay. Why? And it's usually, well, I'm transitioning from, getting paid consistently quarterly to okay, great. That makes sense. But then expecting the commission, right? That as opposed to saying I am signing up to deliver a result. And if I don't deliver the result, I should not expect the commission.
Yeah.
And there's been a strange entitlement that I've seen recently where commission is an expectation. And I think as a hiring manager, you need to make sure you're doing your diligence to understand if the individuals you're bringing into that challenge, that responsibility, really truly are what they say they are. Because salespeople are great interviewers, right? They're great at selling themselves. But honestly, Matt, salespeople suck at interviewing. As far as my experience interviewing salespeople, they ask all the wrong questions to make sure that they are selling themselves into a job that's going to be a good fit for them long term. They ask all the wrong questions. They fail to ask the most important questions that will lend to a much better work experience.
So does that mean we're asking some shitty questions right now?
No, you guys are perfect, right?
All right, so let me give a try right here. So obviously, being a CRO, there's many areas of responsibility that you have. What do you think is there one in particular that causes you more stress or anxiety than others?
Situationally, that causes me stress?
Yeah, just in your role, is it managing expectations for the leadership team and investors? Is it handling particular situations with sellers? Is it certain deals? Is it setting quotas? I mean, what do you think is the most stressful part of your job?
It's less the stress of my interactions with my own organization and my team than it is about a real CRO. And that, by the way, that title has been, abused and applied to VPs of sales. And a CRO's responsibility is to create that cross-functional alignment that maps to end-to-end customer lifecycle, that is feeding and fueling the prospecting and targeting that you do towards your roadmap and your innovation strategy, and creating that balance and symmetry in the company, which means that your responsibility is to create collaboration, coordination, and alignment across your peer group, not necessarily your own organization, as that place where you have to have impact and influence outside of your span of control, right? And that to me, misalignment by design, right, where sort of fiefdoms can build up in companies and you're not all rowing in the same direction, is where I think the most stress can occur in my job, where I see misalignment. Like if the CRO doesn't own marketing, this is a really common situation now where CROs they just own sales and an SDR team, as opposed to owning, customer success and marketing and the whole gamut. And when one of the most common areas of misalignment is in sales, is between sales and marketing. And so I think that challenge of creating harmony across the company so that your alignment is leading you towards the most important, or the true north that the company decides, is one of the bigger challenges and one of the bigger areas of stress that I have in my job.
I know, like, when companies are struggling, I've said this before, it becomes even harder to create that alignment when maybe the company's struggling to find product market fit, or they're not hitting their numbers. And then I've seen this shift to where, like, the currency inside of the organization goes to, like, credit and blame.
Thank you.
Which is like, how can I grab credit for things or blame other people for things? And I mean, any advice on how you create that alignment then, or things that you've done in the past?
It's so hard. And I call it the prying eyes, right? It's all those eyes peering over, the wall and sort of poking and everyone's got an opinion, right? Everyone's got an opinion. And I think it's such a hard place to be, where everyone's got an opinion, and as opposed to taking accountability for their own part of it. And it goes back, Matt, to the alignment piece that I talked about. And if you don't set your company up for alignment towards the mission, then what usually winds up happening is sales is the only organization that's actually being measured, right? And then that piece is absolutely critical, where success and failure is a byproduct of sales hitting its numbers. And if they're not hitting their numbers, then there's a sales problem, as opposed to knowing what the other organizations in the company have signed up for. We've all agreed, right, at the senior leadership level, is critical for customer success and marketing and engineering and product to achieve, to get us to the more important goal than just a number. Because sometimes it is. What's the most important thing? Closing, hitting our number. Well, has anyone asked the question, like, well, why is that important? What is it that accomplishment gets us as a company? And the CEO owns this, right? They own it. And in startups, oftentimes CEOs are not given, they don't give themselves the room to take a step back and slow down to speed up. Right. It's a lot of managing to the tyranny of the urgent that results in thrashing, that results in that situation you just described, where there's, people starting to point fingers of blame and the throwing stones in glass houses, as opposed to looking at, am I doing the things that I should be doing in my function to contribute to this success? And that alignment piece is it's so important, Matt. And then once you create that alignment, I think the second pitfall that I see happen is managing to it and checking in. So oftentimes companies will go through that process of, let's call it OKRs, or alignment from the top down, and goal setting. And then boom, they're off to the races. And then again, they just go right back to measuring sales performance, as opposed to the other agreements that we made as business partners about how we're going to get there as a team and as a company.
So on a previous episode, we interviewed a professor of psychology, and he actually did a study on heart health and heart rate variability of employees. So he actually did a study of people, full-time employees, and saw a correlation between their heart health and when they resigned from the company.
Sure.
And sometimes, stress is due to a company not being a fit any longer for that individual. And, it's never easy to decide that you're going to leave a company. We've obviously, over your career, you've had to make that decision a couple times and move on.
Yeah.
What process do you use for making that decision, and what signals do you see as like, okay, it's time for me to go?
Yeah. And I love it. And I'm wearing my Oura ring. I've got my heart rate variability tracked on a daily basis. And my wife tells me why it's so important. And I still am kind of like, I don't get it. But, the other aspect of the question you asked is like, kind of, how do you know when it's time to move on? And I think there's some general buckets, Sean, that I use, as a catch-all. And that is, there's this one thing that I do where I'm like, if I no longer feel like I can bring someone into the company in good faith, that's when it's time for me to leave, right? Where I feel like if I bring in a really talented person, that I'm bringing them into a mess that I'm responsible for. And so that's my decision point, where I'm like, hey, there's something wrong here. I'm setting them up for failure. There's a cultural issue. There's a toxicity. There's an ethical problem, that I am bringing someone into a situation, and bringing them into a bad situation. So I use that as kind of my primary litmus test as to whether or not it's time for me to leave. And there's so much more to it, Sean. If there's concerns you have legally, if you feel like you're not a good fit, right? There's an honesty that you have to bring to it. And I'm, as you guys know, I don't like to quit. I don't like to quit, and I'm a loyalist. But in my years, I've I think become a little bit more mature about like, when's it time for me to step aside? And the other thing is that I see as a big miss, Sean, that takes some of that anxiety out of that decision, is having the courage to involve your manager in that conversation. Right. And there's a massive amount of courage there. Like, am I putting a bullseye right in my forehead by saying to my manager, I'm struggling and here's why. And I'm trying to figure out if my path forward is able to be done here, or if I need to move somewhere else. And I'm asking you as my coach, but I'm also letting you know as a courtesy as my manager that I might not be on the roster moving forward, and I want you to be able to be planful about that. There's a massive amount of courage and maturity that has to happen there to make that work, and to not do it as a cheesy negotiation to get something you want.
But I think, going back to what you said before, I think it takes less courage to do that if your manager has done an effective job of creating a safe space.
Precisely.
Right? I think it's important for us, okay, as a leader, you want to do everything you can to make your team successful. At the same time, by doing that, you're begetting your own success. And so therefore, by creating this safe environment, when these types of situations arise, like you said, by knowing early on in that person's decision to maybe leave the organization, you're allowing yourself ample time to backfill that position, make necessary changes, or reroute that person to another department that still provides value to you. I mean, it's a selfish way to think about it, but at the same time, by creating that safe space up front, hiring effectively, you are then going to allow yourself less disruption to your success long term.
Correct, Sean. And as a leader in that role, in that position, your responsibility in that moment is to do what's best for that person, right? And there's another big impediment is like, do you walk the walk, right? Or do you just talk the talk? And so if you create that environment of transparency and trust, and then you beat someone over the head with it when they use it, like, people will find out, and you will lose that opportunity to maintain that with your group, with your team. But when they do come to you in that moment, when you put your own selfish interests aside, like, oh, I got to play this person, I got to keep them on until this date, as opposed to saying, all right, let's get after this, to have the courage to say, you're ready for a promotion. You are ready to take the next step. I just don't have that opportunity for you here. And I don't know when I'm going to have it. To not bullshit people and lead them on for your own selfish interests, and to do what's in their best interest, to say, look, you're ready for that next step, or you're not ready for that next step. And it's going to become available for here, and you're going to have an uphill battle to get that next spot. But you know what? If that next place in your career is available to you somewhere else, what can I do to help you get there? Right? To really actually have the courage, both as the employee and the employer, to have an open and honest conversation and be planful, because the worst thing that can happen is for you to be surprised, right? For you to be caught on your heels and not have someone already ramped up in that role. And then ultimately, at the end of the day, shit happens. It's not the norm. It's the exception. It's not the rule. Right?
Yeah.
You called this one out as well, Forrest, of top performing reps, that like 1%. And you've managed people like that. You've been that guy that's been attached to really large deals, and wanted to ask you, like, what do you think that those high performing reps do differently at that level to maintain like an even keel mindset and control their emotions throughout the deal to ultimately get the outcome that they want.
I think that the way I like to describe it is that it's playing chess and not checkers. And in really complex sales, it's playing 3-dimensional chess and not checkers. And I think that there are businesses, Matt, where flying by the seat of your pants, you get pipeline poured in from marketing and your SDR team, and all you do is you show up and throw up a feature demo, and then you're playing the numbers game, right? But when you step into a more complex sale, and it could be that you're at a startup and there's no brand equity and it's a new space, and you're on that curve of, you're selling an idea, and there's so many elements to it. It could be a big, complex, cross-functional consensus sale, but at the end of the day, it's chess and not checkers, and it's about having a plan, right? It's that poise that you see, that cool, ice cold sort of cool that those people you're talking about possess, is about having a plan, about being able to look multiple moves ahead to, my quota is this, and here's how I'm going to get to my quota, and knowing where you are in that process. On a deal level, it's about understanding how a decision is going to get made inside a company and playing to that. You guys have done these deal review sessions with me where you spend 3 or 4 hours trying to put the pieces together so that we can go after the part, we think is going to get us to the desired outcome. And you're fighting the clock. That's the thing. It's not like being a detective, at a police station where you're like, you work the case until it's solved. It's like you're working against the clock in sales. So you have to make some assumptions and extrapolations, but ultimately, and Sean, I had this conversation whiteboarding in a room one time where I said, think about it like a puzzle. You're trying to see the puzzle, and you're starting with a few pieces, and you got to fill in as many pieces as you can. And Matt, you two know that I'm a fan of Holden. I'm sitting here with my pewter Fox, saucer here for my water glass. And I love the methodology because what Holden does is it breaks down this into very sort of, manageable components of like people and politics and process, and how do decisions get made inside a company and who influences those decisions. And I think those people that come across as really poised are selling on a far more sophisticated level, but it's not scary and chaotic to them because they have a methodology that they apply to it. They have a process that they apply to it. You hear people talking about, I'm a challenger sale, or I'm a Sandler, I'm a this. My philosophy is that all those things are just tools. Like when you're a little kid, you see your dad's tool belt and it's just filled with like all kinds of cool. What's that? It's a plumb bob, and that hammer's for this and that's for that. And these are this. Like you're accruing tools as you go through those learnings, the sales methodologies that are just arrows in a quiver that you pull out situationally during the sales process. And as you architect your plan and your strategy, that muscle memory that you have of all that training, right? You hear military and police talking about it, like when these chaotic, crazy battles, and people are like, well, are you Thor? Like, how did you get through that? And it's like, when that chaos happens, when it's the moment of truth, the training kicks in. You've heard that term, the training kicks in. And the more you have worked, on yourself as a sales professional to understand the art and science of sale, the more you come at your annual quota with a plan that's bigger than just hope as a strategy, the more poise you will gain in how you go about winning. And, it's I love it. That part of being a sales professional and learning about how a bill becomes a law inside a company, and being able to take all those learnings and apply them to a sales process and be right and get it right and win. That's fun. That's where selling's fun. Right. And I'm passionate about that. And I think if your ambition is to become a complex enterprise seller, It's not about how fast you're on the 40-yard dash or how charming you are. I think there's a degree of investment that a professional athlete at an elite level, or that a special forces operator or a lawyer or a doctor invests in going beyond the natural talent that they bring to being able to be an incredible chess player at our profession of sales.
Yeah, I mean, for our audience that's inexperienced at this point listening to this episode, that's the same coaching that I would give. Is I remember reflecting back on my young sales self when I first was going into telesign, for example, first time in the SaaS world. And I had my first big deal on the table with Evernote. And it was this pricing negotiation between us and a competitor. And I still remember the deer in the headlights feeling at times, because it was so complex, but yet I didn't have a grounded plan. I didn't have the comfort and all that. But now, fast forward a year or so, we're working on the 10-cent opportunity. That's the one I think, for example, I always remember the whiteboarding sessions around that, because we didn't know who was who in the organization. It was a massive organization in the other side of the world, right? But
Pony
putting
Ma.
that, yeah, exactly. Pony Ma, that was the one. And putting together that plan, when it came down to the actual execution of it, it felt so smooth. Like it felt like it was too easy, because luckily we had made some correct assumptions. And so everything went according to the flow. But even in the complex times when we're trying to grow it, it felt much more grounded or simple in my mind than it had previously with the Evernote example. And I think, like you said, it's because we spent a lot of time working on building out a plan and a methodology to how do we get to what if this is the answer? What if that is the answer? And we built scenarios and plans. And one last thing I'll say is, going back to some other interviews we've done with like performance coaches for athletes, the exact same thing you just said is going into a big meeting or a big deal. At that point, just like going into an Olympic event or going into a sporting event, there's nothing more you can do at that point to like get better. You're like, if you have a plan in place, trust the plan, trust the training, go into that. And then of course, once you're in the meeting, like that's your opportunity to shine. And I just think over time, sellers need to understand that the more they work on their skill set and build out a plan and be prepared, the easier these complex situations will be, and the easier it will be for you to manage the anxiety or stress that may come with it.
And Sean, I think the taking the time to figure out what those individuals actually care about, right, is a big delta that has to be crossed for sellers who move from selling point solutions to operators, where you can go in and say feature, function, price, boom, you turn and burn, to a complex enterprise sale where you need to understand value and ROI and individual motivations of people involved, and influence and politics. And you're asking the right questions so that limited amount of time you get, right, is an opportunity for consensus. And, it's so much fun when you cross that bridge and get into those situations where you really feel like you're going from helping a buyer buy to selling. There's a big distinction between helping a buyer buy and selling. And that is something that I love to invest in my younger sellers who don't have that, in their career, that investment that the company's made in them or their mentor or leaders made in them, and helping them bridge that gap. And it never stops. You never stop learning. And I think the landscape of sales guys will continue to change. Right. It's already in the last decade shifted. It's a hard era to be a salesperson where information is so pervasive. It's everywhere, where our customers show up on a call and they've done their homework and talk to our customers and competitors and, seen ratings and reviews online. And it's a challenging time to be a seller, and it's a great time, to be a really great seller.
Yeah, I think one of the things I'm interested in thinking about the future of sales. So we talked to this company in gaming, in esports, And one of the things that they were doing is they were merging player analytics with player health. And the reason for that was because a bunch of high profile gamers had burnt out and they had retired. And so their concept was we should be able to merge in-game data and how they're playing and their reaction times and their accuracy of shooting and those types of things with the amount of hours they're playing and their blood oxygen levels and their heart rates and all the health data, so they could essentially help these guys perform at a higher level. And I was thinking a little bit about that because like Gong is collecting all this amazing data and Chorus is collecting all this amazing data about performance and the types of things. I wonder if there will ever be a world where they'll like merge, like you mentioned your Oura Ring and like the Apple Watch. Like, do we think we'll ever see like seller health data merge with like Gong like data to figure out like if someone's being productive or not?
Right. I mean, at a rudimentary level, you have to put the pieces together yourself right now to say, I'm fatigued, right? I shouldn't have drank that much last night. I should have gotten more sleep. I'm stressed out. And to be able to bring that awareness of where you may have a weakness in your repertoire going into a sales environment, that ability to use that information to your advantage and to be prepared or to be aware. That's pretty cool. And like I said, we've learned a lot about functional medicine and bio and life hacking. And I think equally that kind of, these wearable devices and understanding all that stuff, our stress levels, our breathing, all that stuff. It's going to continue to become a bigger part of our toolkit that we use. And I think also the bigger piece is your ability to more effectively manage your people. Right. To understand, to not have to, read through the poker face, if your people are aware of when they're in those situations, and able to bring that to your attention to work it out with them. Right.
Yeah. Well, that's probably when sales will start to take this stuff seriously, is when they can tie it to a revenue number. Like that's probably when we'll start to see a shift, I think. And I mean, we're already seeing companies take like employee engagement more seriously and how to measure that. And engagement, I think, is a measure of morale and how they feel at an organization. I think you'll start to see more companies metric these things, burnout and stress, and figure out like what is it impacting them in terms of revenue and cost and those types of things. So it's going to be fascinating to see how it shapes up. And maybe one day we'll step into a meeting room to prep for a call, and we'll all meditate together before jumping on the line with another customer. I don't know.
I think, I'll paint a generality here that'll get me in trouble for stereotyping, but, sales creatures are naturally sort of, paranoid and suspicious. A good paranoid seller is one who's covering their bases in a deal, but they're also a little suspicious of change. And I think that these tools that are available now, right? We talked about it, mindfulness and meditation and functional health and diet and all this stuff. You have to acknowledge that if you're advocating for it openly with people, that they're not going to embrace it right away in many cases. And to your point, if you show them what it's doing, right? If you prove to them that 0 sick days and a healthy, balanced life, though you still have a 12 to 14 hour workday, is what you've gotten out of it, and your productivity is the proof, right? And you can actually help them apply it and see a result of feeling better and feeling more balanced and feeling more even keel. And we sellers tend to be a little paranoid and suspicious of things until we see proof and evidence. And I think that's our responsibility, is to anticipate that, maybe push back or resistance and understand and accept it. But be prepared to give examples, right?
Well, we first of all really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule. I know that yours is probably the most busiest out of the three of us. So we do appreciate that time. And we've always looked to you for, opinions and advice. And we've greatly appreciated, I can't think of a different word than appreciate, all the times that you've spent with us and mentoring us and helping advise us. We've definitely learned in our careers and grown in our careers because of you. So there's no more important person that we were happy to invite on to the show. So thank you for joining us. And I think one thing would be interesting is if anybody in the audience wanted to find you, get a hold of you in any way, is there a place that they can reach out? Anything you suggest?
Salesperson, they better know how to find me, right? SDR me, guys. Yeah, I think you guys know I'm pretty open. LinkedIn, find me on LinkedIn. Connect with me. Make sure here's a pet peeve of mine, like a LinkedIn invitation without a little note. Send a little note in there. Hey, I heard you on the Two Sales Guys podcast, or Sean and Matt, or Pants and Craig, whatever you guys have. Reach out. I'm happy to talk and chat, and I share my contact information freely.
Awesome.
Thanks so much, Forrest.
I'm really glad you guys picked this topic. I think it's one that, it's an important one. And I think you've identified and felt that sales is a part of the company that feels an enormous amount of pressure, and that sometimes that pressure is good and it's constructive and healthy and positive and drives the business forward. And sometimes it's unnecessary and it's unhealthy and it detracts from productivity. And I think everyone, including the CEO, should be able to discern between how to create cultures of positive stress and positive pressure, and know how to avoid or identify where the unhealthy, destructive stress and pressure is coming from and can be avoided. So I'm really appreciative that you guys chose this topic.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you again, Forrest, for joining. It has been a pleasure.
Go sell something, guys.
Bye. Thank you very much for the continued support and for sharing our episodes with your family and friends. You guys are amazing. When you like and subscribe, you'll get notifications for our new episodes, like in 2 weeks when we interview Dr. Jim Driscoll. Dr. Jim has been helping individuals, including my family, achieve their optimum level of health and wellness with chiropractic healthcare, science-based nutrition, and exercise, and he's been doing this for many years. And although he's a Wolverine alum and fan, he's a very interesting take on a link between gut health and mental health. Tune in on February 10th to learn what you should and shouldn't be grabbing while under stress, and how the fuel you put in your body can actually impact your performance. Thank you so much for listening, and see you next time.